Joining me up the front now, we have Yvonne Power, the Principal Consultant WA at Everick Heritage, and joined by Nick Svede, the Associate Archaeologist, together currently leading Everick Heritage's expansion into Western Australia, focused on delivering culturally sensitive and innovative heritage solutions. And speaking this morning on culture, country and catchments, integrating heritage and environmental restoration. Please welcome them to the front.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk for maybe a minute and then hand across to Nick. So he's got the raw end of the deal. So which way is which? That way. I'll just pop that there for a second. So before I begin, I'd obviously like to start by acknowledging the Balladong Nyungar people, who are the traditional owners of the country that we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We're going to be talking about waterways, but before I do, I'd just like to acknowledge as well the great work that's being done by Bilyacourt Budja, which we were able to visit yesterday. I think it's a really fantastic centre and a really good resource. And the work that's being done there, obviously by the Balladong people to protect the environment, share Balladong culture and Balladong knowledge about country, I think is a really great touchstone for everybody there. And I'd also like to say thank you very much to the Heritage Council and GPLH for organising this event today. So as mentioned, I'm Yvonne Power, so I'm Principal Consultant at Everick Heritage and also Everick Foundation. Oh, I should have gone to the acknowledgement slide when I was doing the acknowledgements. There you go. So we've skipped past that. So Everick, I did want to just talk briefly before we kick off. So this is the contents of what we're going to be talking about today. And I said I'll pass over to Nick in a second to talk about what we wanted to touch on. But just briefly touching on who Everick Heritage is, because most of you won't have ever heard of us, because it's a company that's come from the eastern states. But it consists of two parts, Everick Heritage and Everick Foundation. And as mentioned, we deal with cultural heritage. We also have things like GIS and creative and community engagement. And we work alongside traditional owners across Australia. And the foundation side is the not-for-profit part of the business. And that works predominantly on supporting community-led projects and subsidises projects and does a lot of work with community on things like capacity building and governance. Nick is going to be taking the mic from me in a second and I'll stop talking. But really the crux of this talk is to start to touch on what we see as the connection between environmental restoration and cultural heritage. And obviously from a context perspective, most of you will have seen, crossed, driven over the Avon River, which for the Balladong people is called Gogulya. So that river is going to be really quite central to what we're going to be touching on today. And I think that Sue, I'm not sure if Sue's in the room, but Sue did a really great job yesterday of talking about songlines and why things like waterways are really important to Indigenous people. And what we're going to be talking about today really is touching on the current, I guess, legislative frameworks and how we treat those in terms of protection and why that's failing. So we'll be talking about it in terms of not just thinking about waterways or rivers as a series of different sites or sections, but as a living and flowing waterway that has very important and cultural significance, obviously, to traditional owners. And we'll talk about why this current system of protection is failing and touch on a few case studies that we would like to talk to you about across Australia. So I will, at that point, pass over to Nick and let you jump in.
Cool. Thanks, Yvonne. My name's Nick Svede. Just a quick word on what we do so you know where I'm coming from. Everick Heritage works on traditional cultural assessments, surveys, mapping and compliance along traditional owner groups. We deliver formal work that supports land use and development decisions. The foundation, by contrast, is set up to do things the formal system doesn't fund easily: capacity building, governance, tools that traditional owners actually want to use. That distinction matters for what's coming because most of what I'll show you today happens in that second space outside of the regulatory framework in partnership with traditional owner organisations. So let's take a look over our local context. And up front, I'll apologise for all my pronunciation of these Noongar words. I need to get better at it. But Gugya Bilya, before European settlement, this was a braided river. Many small channels running between vegetated islands with deep, well-shaded permanent pools. Tujay, Northam, York, these were sites of permanent water in a dry country. They're not anymore. Today, the river dries to disconnected pools from late spring through autumn. What changed? Two things principally. Clearing, over 75% of the original woodlands gone, as we saw in yesterday's presentation. The clearing mobilised salt long stored deep in the soil profile, and river training. From the mid-1950s to the 1970s, bulldozers cleared the braided channels, deepened and straightened the river to push floodwaters through faster. Of the 26 major pools that once existed between Cooper's Pool and Yenying Lakes, 8 are now totally filled with sand. 5 more are nearly filled. Around 6% of farmland in the Avon Basin is now salt affected. CSIRO modelling has projected that figure could rise to between 10 and 30% by 2050. These are not small numbers, and they are not, in a technical sense, heritage impacts of the kind the Aboriginal Heritage Act was designed to prosecute. They are slow, cumulative degradation that is also, at the same time, heritage degradation. Because the river the Waggle made, the river of permanent shaded pools, is being unmade. The Aboriginal Heritage Act was designed in 1972 with a particular kind of project in mind: discrete development, a defined site, a moment of impact. Did the proponent get Section 18 consent, yes or no? Did they impact the site, yes or no? It works pretty well for that. What it doesn't do well is continuous features. The Avon River, Gugya Bilya, is a registered Aboriginal heritage site as a whole linear feature. The tributaries are part of it, so is every crossing. The Act draws a red line around the river and the tributaries on the register, and then a tool designed for surface level disturbance footprints is in that scenario, in scenarios it wasn't drafted for. This isn't a failure of the Act. The Act was considered as progress in the 1970s. It's just outdated and a mismatch for modern application. And the result is the AHA can't easily address the things that are actually killing the river: salinity, channel training, cumulative agricultural runoff, sedimentation. Those harms are diffuse, they are slow, they are impossible to attribute to a single actor. These aren't easily defined as Section 17 offences, so they continue. The EPA Act, the other tool we have, Part 4 assessments. Under the EPA Act, the EPA can assess what it calls social surroundings, and Aboriginal cultural heritage is a part of those social surrounding assessments. The EPA has a legislative mandate to consider impacts inside and outside of the activity area, including indirect impacts like groundwater drawdown affecting a culturally significant waterhole. So why isn't the EPA doing this work for the Avon? Because it's almost never activated outside of major mining and infrastructure proposals. Diffuse rural impacts don't trigger a referral. There is no proponent. There are tens of thousands of landholders. There is no single project. There is 150 years of agricultural development. The EPA Act has the scope to do this work, but the threshold and the trigger are wrong for a feature like Gugya Bilya. So, we have one act that's reactive and site-based, and another that's prospective and landscape-based, but rarely used. Neither one adequately addresses the cumulative impacts at the whole of country scale or places traditional owners in the lead. There have been many attempts to manage the Avon. They go back more than 40 years. In 1984, Avon River's Systems Management Committee was formed. Local government representatives from across the catchment, no statutory powers, working through advice and opinion. They produced a draft management strategy in 1991. 33 submissions came during the public consultation. Of those 33 submissions, none were presented from the perspectives of local Noongar or Balladong groups. One submission was from the Department of Aboriginal Sites at the Western Australian Museum, and that was it. In 1993, the management's recommendations led to the formation of the River Management Authority, established under the Waterways Conservation Act with statutory powers to manage the bed and banks of the river. The 1999 management program listed Aboriginal cultural heritage issues as priority 5.2.6, the 6 of 6 priorities under community relations. This action statement for the priority was a single paragraph saying that they would consult with the local Aboriginal community. This body, the ARMA, was dissolved in 2001. A successor body, Avon Waterways Committee, was formed in 2002, which was eventually dissolved when the government abolished small committees. The 2J Friends of the River, who have done extraordinary on-the-ground work for 30 years, describe that period as one where, in their words, the skills to achieve the support required were not evident. The Waterways Committee was, again in their words, the last government-sponsored committee to provide any coordinated advocacy from a community perspective on the Avon River. So, 40 years of well-intentioned work, statutory bodies, strategies, recovery plans, volunteer hours that I couldn't begin to count, and the river still dries to pools. The salinity is still rising. The thing that has never been tried at any of these institutional moments is a First Nations-led approach, the kind we see elsewhere across Australia. Let me show you 3 places where things have gone differently, or where they haven't, and where that matters. So, case study 1, Mandoon Bilya, the Helena River. Flows from Balladong country near York and Beverley through the Perth Hills down into Whadjuk country at Midland, and joins the Derbarl Yerrigan, the Swan, at Guildford. 6 local government areas, including Northam. The whole river is a registered Aboriginal site. 40 plus individually registered places along its length. The lower floodplain at the Hazelmere has one of the oldest archaeological sites in the southwest West Australia, at least 29,000 years old. The river has been hammered. Mundaring Weir and the lower Pumpback Dam removed most of the natural flow from the middle catchment. The lower plain has carried legacy contamination from a fire training site, and Western Australia's first permeable reactive barrier was installed in 2010 to stop that contamination from reaching the river. What is different about Mandoon Bilya is who is leading the recovery work. The Bubu Nara, pardon my pronunciation, Aboriginal Association runs a program called Buyu Ba Bilya, an integrated catchment plan that combines cultural mapping, conservation auditing, socioeconomic analysis, and on-the-ground works. It's tied to a public milestone, the 2029 Perth Bicentenary, and includes proposed 250-hectare regional river park. In 2025, they received 2 grants in parallel. Community River Care grants from DBCA, the Environmental Department for Environmental Works, and Preserve, Promote and Protect Our Aboriginal Sites grants from DPLH, the Heritage Department for Heritage Works. Same project, 2 funding streams, 2 departments, integrated on the ground by the Aboriginal Association. That's what integration actually looks like in practice. The grants arrive separately at the agency level, they get integrated at the community level, because Bubu Narma is doing the integrating. The point I want you to take from Mandoon Bilya is that this is operationally available now. In the same Noongar country, across a catchment that connects directly to where we are. The model is working an hour and a half away. It's not an thought experiment. Case study 2. Willy Wally Creek is in the Pilbara, on Bunjima and near Bali country. Traditional owners have cared for it for tens of thousands of years. Spring is a place of major cultural and ceremonial importance. 21 acknowledged sacred sites in the area associated with the Walu, the water serpent. Under the traditional law, you do not interfere with the water that rises from those springs. In 2007, Rio Tinto began dewatering the Hope Downs ore body to mine iron ore beneath the water table. The EPA Assessment Act, 6 years earlier, had imposed conditions, maintaining spring flow, managing water levels, return the system to within 10% of natural flow rates after mine closure. The EPA's own report explicitly recognised both the conservation and heritage values of the spring. 18 years later, what's happened? The spring flow has stopped. Surface water at the spring is now maintained by mechanical irrigation. Permanent flows extend about 19 kilometres downstream, up from 2 kilometres pre-mining, because surplus water is being discharged into the creek. New vegetation has established along the now permanent flow zone. River red gums and coolabahs in the formerly ephemeral sections are now showing decline. Silver cajeput trees are groundwater dependent and have dried upstream of the spring where the water table dropped below their root zone. In the 2018 EPA published evaluated report, they checked out their own work. They concluded that the creek has, and in their phrase, responded as predicted. Here's what's striking about the 2018 report. It runs to 12 pages of detailed hydrology and vegetation analysis. It mentions traditional owners exactly once, in a single sentence, noting that the pools and trees are valued by the Bunjima and Nyiyaparli people. The 21 sacred sites aren't named, the Walu associations aren't mentioned, and whether the spring is still the spring when its surface water is mechanically maintained by the natural flow has ceased, that question is not asked because it's not the EPA's question. I might fast forward a little bit to keep in with time. But the cultural, or do you think? No. That's a cautionary case. It's not a model, but it tells us something important, that the EPA Act is not on its own. Conditions are not enough on their own. Governance is the difference, who's at the table and generally consulted when the decisions get made. Finally, I'll fast forward to the Butchulla water stories. Kurigai, formerly known as Fraser Island, is the World Heritage listed sand island off southeast Queensland. The Butchulla people are the traditional owners. Native title was recognised in 2014. The traditional name Kurigai was formally restored by Queensland government in 2023. In 2020, during the Kurigai bushfires, emergency services made decisions about water, extracting from perch lakes, applying salt water to fires, taking water from the mainland without any cultural information. There was no decision support material available. Butchulla cultural values weren't part of the operational picture. After the fires, the Butchulla Aboriginal Corporation, working with the Butchulla Native Title Aboriginal Corporation, the Everick Foundation, and the University of Sunshine Coast, established the Butchulla Water Stories Project. It received a grant from the Great Barrier Reef Foundation in 2022. The outputs were specific and they were operational. A story gathering and cultural mapping process led by Butchulla elders and members, a web-based mapping system protecting Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, a 4-year Butchulla water story management plan, and a water extraction support decision tool used by emergency services on Kurigai. The last one is the one I want you to remember. A water extraction decision support tool used by emergency services. When a fire happens now, an operations officer makes a different decision because Butchulla cultural values are encoded into that system they're using. That isn't just consultation, that isn't just having traditional owners at the table, it's deeper than that, and it is Butchulla knowledge embedded in the operational tools that non-Butchulla agencies use to do their work. Heritage stops being something agencies are consulted on, it becomes something built into how decisions are made. And it didn't go through the Heritage Act or an EPA Act, it was funded through non-statutory environmental funder. It was led by a traditional owner corporation, and it produced an operational tool. It works. I'll just quickly show you a video produced by Everett Creative and the Butchulla Rangers.
Gallagher the Buffy. Welcome to country.
Our first law is what's good for the land must come first, and through all of our projects, and that's our first and foremost thing that we focus on in what we do is to look after country. So the Healthy Waters Project idea came from when we had the dueling wildfire in 2020. It was very difficult at that time because we didn't have any water management plan, or we didn't have a lot of our cultural knowledge recorded to be able to identify and make the decisions about where we could and could not draw water from in the emergency situations. In relation to when there is a wildfire, hot fire coming through, we've got to be able to draw water from different lakes on the island. So we don't want to be drawing water from lakes that are perch lakes that do rely on rainwater, because we could impact those lakes by reducing them. They may never come back again. We want to look more at the window lakes, which are majority in the northern end of the island that have that continuous water flow, to be able to draw from those lakes and use that sort of water. So definitely having a water management plan that we're able to say yes, and we're already to know in advance where we can and can't draw the water from, so we don't have them cultural or environmental impacts happening. Good thing about the cultural mapping and collating this information is that we're able to look at the tangible and intangible cultural values and have them there, like I said, for future generations, and being able to record these. So definitely the cultural mapping is a good tool, and our people are very visual. So being able to have a map and being able to show them and to record this stuff is going to be a lot useful for our elders and for our people to be able to get more of an understanding and educational value out of this mapping.
I think it's very, very important that we try and maintain, the best of our ability to always look after the waterways. Because not only we need it, you've got to think about the opportunity of what about our flora and fauna that's based around those waterways? Their survival, just like we're survived. Minyang Galangorgu, Jakalambayam, whatever's good for country must come first. Your way.
So, I want to flag one more piece of context before I bring this back to Guyabilia. In recent years, there's been a real movement on Indigenous rights in Western Australia. The Yamatji Nation Indigenous Land Use Agreement, registered in 2020, established a strategic Aboriginal reserve, 25.8 gigalitres of groundwater for the Yamatji Nation to use or trade. The Yamatji Water Company runs that reserve. The first commercial licence to silica sands proponent was signed in 2021. The 2023 Dual Palku Kua Ilua, settling the 3 native title compensation claims in the Northern Goldfields, including dual involvement in water management on dual country, including assessment of water licences in the rights under Water and Irrigation Act. These are real, they matter. They give traditional owners commercial water powers, but they did not exist 5 years ago. Here's what they do not give. They do not give traditional owners the power to act as stewards of their water under traditional law. The Yamatji Water Company can lease 25.8 gigalitres of its allocations. It cannot prevent the salinity rising in the Murchison. It cannot stop the next dewatering project. The reserve is a commercial right, not a stewardship right. It addresses the economic dispossession from water, but not the custodial one. Water rights are necessary, but they are not sufficient. So, bringing this home, the Avon Guyabilia has been managed by everyone except the people who have known it the longest. We have had 1 local government committees, statutory authorities, integrated catchment group management groups, recovery plans, volunteers, organisations. They've all done good work. None of them has put Balladong people at the centre. What would it look like if we did? I think it looks like 4 things drawn directly from the case studies you've just heard. First, we name it properly, the Guyabilia. The Avon River is one valid name for it, and Guyabilia is another. Both can be true. The renaming isn't a decoration, it shifts whose river it is in a small but real way. Second, we treat it as one continuous thing, not a list of registered sites with red lines around them on a map nobody told the landholders about. A single river, one management plan, one integrated cultural management framework, like Mandoon Bilya, like the Babuya Bilya plan. Third, we build the operational tools, the Butchula model, a decision support resource for the catchment, for landholders, for shires, for road managers, for fire response, for anyone who might be working near the river, that integrates Baladong cultural values into routine decision making. Not a register that prosecutes failures after the act, a tool that prevents them. Something a landholder can pull up that says in plain language, this brook carries Waggle associations. Here is the conversation you'll want to have. Here are the practices that keep both your operation and the country healthy. The Maddox case arguably never happens if that tool exists. Fourth, we fund the right people, not the consultants. I say that as a consultant, the Aboriginal Corporation. Babuya Court Buja already exists. It's an institutional anchor that didn't exist 20 years ago. The Shire of North End has built it. Baladong governance is in place. What is needed now is a resource modelling, joint DPLH and DBCA funding on the Babuya Nama model, scaled to a catchment of this size to do the work. I'm not here to argue the limitations of the Aboriginal Heritage Act. The insufficiencies I've presented today are clear enough. The EPA Act isn't sufficient on its own either. Both acts used together with Baladong people leading, that's the proposition. Not new legislation, new governance. I'll close where I started. The river outside this room, Gagulya Bilya, is the same river the Maddox case is about. It's the same river that others are working on at Mandoon Bilya, 90 kilometres west of here. It's the same kind of river that the Bunjima and the Neobali people are trying to protect at Wirwali, 2,000 kilometres north. It's the same kind of waterway that the Butchula are caring for at Kurugai on the other side of the country. The work transfers, the lessons transfer. What stops us is not technical, it's not legal. Both acts are sitting right there. It's a question of who we are willing to put at the centre of the management of these places. The answer to that question for Gagulya Bilya and for every river like it has been there all along. The country knows it, Baladong people know it. Maybe our job is much smaller than we think it is, and maybe our job is to stop being in the way. Thank you.
Nick Svede and Yvonne Power, thank you so much. Wow. And it's timely because who's local or northern based here? Yeah, so there's a few hands there. About this time of year, and we've just passed the time of year that I'm about to speak of, where we all, as residents of Northam, notice the river because of the smell. When it dries up, it has this interesting odour that we shut our windows to avoid. It's really bad, and we know, the flood of comments across the Northern Community Board it happens this time every year, and then it settles because the rains come and we forget. But the question always is the same: who and how and what. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably a big dollar figure question as well. And on the morning of the state budget being handed down, I wonder if there's consideration for projects like this. Do we have any questions from the floor? Thank you.
How certain are you that amongst the community, the old knowledge of what to do to keep them flowing still exists? Do you know that knowledge still exists?
Yeah, I think I can't speak personally for Baladong people, and I would never want to. I think so I won't directly say whether it does or doesn't. What I will say is that everyone else under the sun has been given an opportunity, and I think the people whose responsibility is first and foremost is that community. and they need to be empowered to have the seat at the table there, finally be put back in their place of stewardship, which has long been denied to them and under-consulted on.
I might just add, we had a really great presentation by Balladong here yesterday, and they talk about their ranger program. So we know that the knowledge is there. You know, they have a really flourishing ranger program. And I think what we're advocating for here is an extension of that.
Absolutely. And I can see a forum coming to the table with all of the stakeholders that you mentioned, Nick, in the same room at the same time. Is that what it takes?
Oh, it's definitely not one stakeholder group, but I think we've just seen so many case studies that we could talk a lot longer about the successes of just having Aboriginal groups whose country those waterways exist on as being probably the main voice at the table, and just listening to how they manage country and how they understand country and how they keep countries healthy, and things like healthy country plans. You know, they've been around for a while, and I'm seeing a bit of a resurgence of that now as well. So it's really quite encouraging.
It is, absolutely. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Quiet contemplation, no doubt. Yvonne and Nick, thank you so much. Please give them another round of applause. Everett Heritage, thank you.